Our Cattleyas just finished flowering. We're now in autumn and we're heading into winter. This is Cattleya Labiata semi-alba, which is an autumn flowering Cattleya. And what do we do now? Because we have heard that a lot of Cattleyas should be repotted immediately after flowering. So what do we do with this? We're worried now that it's going into winter, the temperatures are going to drop. Should this be repotted? Let's get straight into it. We'll explain to you a little bit about this orchid and whether repotting now in winter is ideal for it. Because, as I said, winter's generally the time of year where most orchids stop their actual active growth, especially as the temperatures start to cool off. But what do we do with these orchids that flower in autumn? Do we go in and repot them immediately? There's some things that you have to look out for first. Firstly, of course, when you see an orchid in this sort of state that is well outgrown its pot, it could be a very good idea to repot at this point, not only because it's just way outgrown its pot. We need to get these roots into a media before they dehydrate from our winter dryness, because we have really low humidity levels in winter and these will just desiccate these roots terribly. That's one of the reasons that I really want to get this into a pot. The media I'm going to use is going to be okay for it, because often if you have roots that are outside or have grown outside of a pot like this, if you put them straight into a media, they can then be suffocated and they will die and rot. But the way I'm repotting this, it's going to allow for enough air movement around them and they should be fine. Also, these Cattleya Labiata semi-albas only root or start producing new roots once the flowers are finished. And with most orchids, this is the point that you really want to pot. It doesn't depend on when the flowering happens, but when the rooting happens. And with this rooting after flowering means this is the time that you need to get in and repot it. So even if your temperatures are going to get cold in winter, you best repot now so that those roots, as they grow, can then be acclimatized to the new media that you're putting them in. And with these Cattleya Labiata semi-albas, they can actually flower twice a year. They'll flower in that autumn period and then again in that spring period. They can flower, but the autumn period is their main flowering season, and they can again, often if you're looking after them properly, flower again in spring. So this is one of the ways that you are able to tell the difference between Cattleya Labiata and Cattleya Mendlea. Even if their flowers can look particularly similar at times, is the flowering times. The flowering time of the Mendlea is generally in spring and they don't get an autumn flowering. Whereas your Labiata semi-albas are going to flower in autumn mainly, and they can still flower again in spring. We're getting a little bit stuck here again. After having soaked this even for 20 minutes, these roots aren't releasing as easily as I would like. So we go to our magic spray again to spray on to help release those roots a bit quicker. If you want to know more about this magic spray, look down in the description box. We'll give you a link to the video. And in just about 5 minutes or so, these roots should come off quite easily. We'll just keep working at it slowly and carefully. Remember, you don't want to be too vigorous with this. You want to just be gentle. If you are potting this back up into a bark media or quite a closed media, then perhaps you can ignore this part of the repotting altogether and you can actually cut off all those roots completely. Because as I said earlier, if you're putting it into quite a closed media, then these roots are just going to suffocate and die because they are acclimatized to being out in the open and having all that air movement and drying out quickly. And by putting them into a tight media again, you're just going to suffocate them. Another thing is that these labiatas don't necessarily go through the same dormancy period as what your Mendleas do. They go through that dormancy in winter, and at that point all they're busy doing is producing those buds inside those sheaths, whereas your labiatas can continue growth throughout that winter phase. There we go. We've managed to release all the roots from the outside. Now let's empty it out of the pot. The media actually hasn't decomposed too badly. It just shows this was growing really quickly, and we can remove all of that media from in between. What I am going to do is I'm going to go into the center here, and actually these roots are actually really good. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to pull out those bad rotten roots. I'm going to leave all of the rest of the roots. So this is going to have a big strong root volume for it to carry on growing. Because what it is possible to do is to remove just about the majority of the root growth on your Cattleyas and just leave that new root growth then to take over. But then perhaps you may want to remove some of this old pseudobulb volume from the back. Just rinse off any of that extra media. And to release those roots, do it rather in just lukewarm, or not even lukewarm water, in room temperature water, and just leave it for that 20 minutes or so. But again, you can check down that video to check the full details on that. So what I'm doing is I'm working backwards from the original section of the plant towards the newer growing section, and just removing the roots as I go along that are dead. Because generally it's those older roots that will die off and rot first. Another good little rinse off there. If any of the ends of those roots are damaged, then what we can just do, let's get a nice pair of sharp secateurs, nicely sanitized, and just go clip off any of those dried dead ends of those new roots. And you don't have to worry about doing this, because with a lot of Cattleyas, your roots can actually branch, or do actually branch. So if you're cutting off a section of the root and the balance of the root is still okay, what will happen often is that root will still stay alive and will branch off, producing more viable roots. There we go. We can see how this has started to root. I'll bring that closer now. So all I'm doing here is keeping the greener parts of the roots. So let me bring it up closer and show you. There we go. We can see where that one section has gone whiter, and there's the green section. So what I'll do is just cut it off just above where the white starts into the green. Like that. Actually, this here also is just over there, so we can just cut that off over there. And this is what I mean by the roots can branch. So you'll get all these roots, these side roots shooting off the main root. So that's what's going to happen here too, where we cut off. So we'll just go through. These are the roots that were inside the pot, so they're generally whiter by nature. We'll just break that with the dead parts off the end. But all of those that were on the outside that have gone green now, they had chlorophyll, but these parts are obviously dead because there's no chlorophyll in them. So that's also one nice thing about giving your orchid a little bit of a soak before repotting. Not only are those roots more malleable, pliable, all of those sorts of words, but also you can start seeing more easily what parts of the roots that need to be removed. And also let me explain to you and show you what's happening with these new roots that are coming out of this shoot that has just finished flowering, or the pseudobulb that's just finished flowering. We'll just remove this old debris, these leaf sheaths off the pseudobulb, and let me come show you. Here you can see all the new root growth starting to happen with those nice little green tips here. And then here, these new roots, you see little blackened tips. What's happened was I'd brought this indoors. I'd brought it inside so that I could enjoy the flowers, and my humidity levels were too low. And low humidity levels can kill off those tender little root tips really easily. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to get this repotted quickly. I don't want to dry out those roots anymore and start causing any further problems. I've got a nice big plant here that I want to keep as a big display plant. I'm not going to divide it up into pieces. And if you do at this point, just find where it's going to come apart the most naturally and get your secateurs in carefully and cut through there. Generally, you want at least 3 or 4 of those pseudobulbs for a single subdivision. Remember, the bigger the plant is, the more likely you're going to get flowers in the following year. The smaller the plant is, the longer it's going to take for it to mature enough to reflower again. So let's have a look at the media I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using these broken brick shards again. And this I've knocked up into relatively small pieces. That's going to allow for lots and lots of drainage and that excellent air movement. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm not going to be putting these dry brick shards onto my orchid, because what will happen is they'll just absorb the water out of those roots. So what we do first is we just give them a good soak. Let's see. And there's the telltale sign of what else I'm going to be using. Your brick shards are going to bubble and fizz for a bit. That's just them absorbing the water, and all the air pockets inside the brick is being replaced by moisture. So that generally takes about 5 minutes to stop. And that's all that you need. You just want to replace all the air that is inside those clay brick shards to be filled with water, and then you know you're good to go. So let's start with the basics. Here we're going to be using polystyrene styrofoam. Please don't go out and buy fresh styrofoam to use with your orchids. You're just causing environmental hazards you can't believe. It is completely inert. It's never going to really break down. So if you have polystyrene hanging about from a new fridge or something that you bought, instead of just throwing that into the tip, rather reuse it. It at least gives it a second life of some sort instead of just throwing it away immediately. And we're just going to break that up into pieces to put at the bottom of the pot. This doesn't absorb any water at all, so it's pointless throwing it into the water. It's just going to float on top anyway. It's completely inert, so all it's used is to supply drainage and to allow for air movement. And we're just putting it at the bottom of the pot. Also, just using pure brick shards, even though the pot isn't that big, it still makes it a heavy pot. So just having this extra little bit of lightness to the pot, filling it up at the base a bit, is going to make it easier to move around. But still, it's going to give it enough weight so that your plant's not going to fall over because of all those brick shards. So it really doesn't matter whether you do a quarter, a half, a third, anything like that's going to be fine. I could actually be mixing charcoal in with my mix here. Perhaps I should. Do I have any? I don't have any charcoal, but it doesn't matter. I was going to be using these brick shards anyway, and they're ready now to use. Especially if you've got a lot of roots, you can just put it in initially on top of that styrofoam, and then just take your brick shards and just gently drop them in. Remember, place your orchid or the back of your orchid towards one of the corners of the pot to give your plant as much room as possible to grow forward. There's a few little tricks that you can use to help cause lateral growth in your orchids. I'll be doing a video coming up on that, and perhaps I might even show you on this specific orchid as well a bit later. But for now, we're just quickly getting this in. And the nice thing with the brick shards is they're heavy, so they're going to drop straight in. So it's not going to have to fiddle too much to get them in and around the roots. They actually fall into place quite easily. Also with this, you can't compact the media, which is one of the nicest things about using these brick shards. It holds its structure, and you can allow your orchid to grow in it for long, long periods without having to repot until, of course, your orchid outgrows the pot. And if you are being a little bit rough and pushing the brick shards around, be careful, you can start damaging your orchid. So we just gently rolling them in one on top of the other. Just give it a little shimmy shake. And if you've noticed, because there was so much root volume, the plant itself is pretty stable already. That's the nice thing with these brick shards, is the structure that they hold. And if you do need to stake up your plants, remember, with something hard like brick shards, you're going to have to put your stake in first and then fill in around it, because to try and get in a stake through this is going to be almost impossible. And there we go. I'm not covering up the rhizome in any way whatsoever. I'm allowing it free air movement and light and everything that it could ever want. And now it's a matter of letting it settle in. So there's not going to be much watering being done. There's not going to be any feeding being done. It's going to be allowed to settle in for at least a month. Of course, if we do get those ultra dry days in winter where our humidity level goes right down, then we may have to spritz across it just to stop any of that withering of those pseudobulbs or that leathering of the leaves. Remember, if your orchid has been unlabeled and you're not sure whether it's Cattleya Labiata semi-alba or Cattleya Mendlea semi-alba, then look out for those things that I told you. Look out for the flowering time and whether it starts to go dormant during that winter period. And if you have any other orchid related questions, drop them in the comments box below. We'll be sure to get back to them in a couple of hours. And any further queries, don't be shy. Check out that Buy Me a Coffee link down below. Ed posts up a lot of content down there all the time that is freely available to everyone. And if you like what you see, feel free, sign up, become a member, and grow like a pro. Thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.